All right, Aro Podcast listeners, you are about to be delighted. Now, especially if you live in the South, you are already very familiar with this gentleman's work as a beach attendant at Watercolor Inn and Spa in the summer of 2013. Now, if you're not, this will be a real treat for you. Ladies and gentlemen, retired budget analyst and current stand-up comedian and most hilarious person I've ever met, Andrew Stanley. Andrew, welcome to the Aro Podcast, my friend.
Thank you so much. I get introduced a lot, and that was one of my favorites ever because no one knows I was a beach attendant in Watercolor, Florida.
Well, it looks like they've not been to your LinkedIn page, buddy, because it's up there.
Yeah, I got to clean that up. That's probably still got my high school GPA on it.
I'd never seen a GPA that high. I'd never seen one in the sixes. That is really impressive.
Turns out LinkedIn does not check. You can just put whatever. You just type it in, and they don't have any kind of filter system. So
they just accept it. I like that.
No, I was actually a beach attendant in Panama City, not Watercolor, but
it wasn't even Watercolor.
I just wanted to lie. No, it was. I was just saying you could also lie about nicer resorts you've worked at.
What do you think? Like, if you, as looking back on that summer, like, what was like? When did you really get into a flow state? Like, did you bring out like an extra side of fries or something, and you're like, I nailed it. Like, just knowing that you had done something good.
They did not trust me with any of the food, so I was more of a get there at 5 a.m. and set up all the chairs and umbrellas, and then
got it.
People would have reserved their seats ahead of time, so you had a whole list of the people that would be coming down, and then they would come down and say, we're the Smith family, and then you'd be like, right this way, and they'd be like, we don't like these seats, and I'd be like, I have a walkie-talkie, that's it. They give me the list, and you just fight with all these rich families about where they're sitting on the beach, and every now and then there would be like a name on the list that would be like a famous person's name, and I remember one time there was like a David Matthews. And me and all my friends were like, Dave Matthews is coming down, get ready. And we were so disappointed when the real David Matthews came down. He did not sing at all.
Well, that'd be quite a move by Dave Matthews just to go like, you know what, I'll throw him off my scent. Like, I'm going to put David on there.
Yeah.
You know? That's my pseudonym is David Matthews.
Yeah. David Matthews Band.
What would be an example of why someone wouldn't like their position looking on the vastly nearly infinite ocean?
Yeah, it's a golf actually. As I was corrected many times. So
6.0 GPA.
Like, the ocean looks great today. It's actually the golf. It's just what everybody wants to hear on their vacation.
Just how would you know how it looks?
There are many reasons people would be dissatisfied by their seats. One is some days there would be 3 rows of seats. And so people that were not on the front row, you don't even really see the ocean. You just see the people in front of you, which I never even understood.
See the ocean anyway, as I recently learned.
Yeah, true. See, I still get caught sometimes. But also there's 3 boardwalks. And if you have to walk a long way to get back to the boardwalk, people didn't like that. So there's a lot of learning how to do crowd work, basically.
Wow.
Which I use now on stage, but a lot of just dealing with dissatisfied people.
Do you when you like, do you feel like that really, like that experience, have you derived any comedy out of that? I mean, out of that summer waiting on, I mean, you just did a little bit there, but have you taken anything from that? It seems like you got some gold there, especially if you're talking like people in the South, like in the Southeast, they understand when you start referring to like the lifestyle down there on 30A. Like John Christ has done a great job of kind of talking about all that stuff. Have you done any bits off that?
I haven't done any bits. I should. It's a lot of comedians, they work in the service industry, and they'll work at restaurants and stuff, and you always hear people say, hey, you got to work in the service industry at least for a little while in your life, or you'll be a terrible person. And that's the closest I got to working in the service industry, was living in my friend's beach house and going to the beach for sunrise and being there for sunset every day for a whole summer. And so it's pretty tough to make people feel bad for you when you're like, yeah, I was a beach attendant and watercolor, stayed at a beach house for free. Um, but no, I probably should mind that for stories, because there was definitely some strange things that happened while we were there.
I can imagine. That sounds pretty amazing. All right, so I mentioned that you were a budget analyst, and I want to, and I know you've gone over this many times. Will you tell us about the transition from the age old story of a budget analyst turned comedian? Will you tell us how in the world that happened?
Yeah, well, I was just seeing all the other budget analysts become comedians, and I was like, I guess this is the trajectory. Uh, everybody I worked with was like 60 years old, um, and so they were not doing a lot of bits. Um, but it got to where I was, I graduated from college with a finance degree and got a job at a good company, kind of entry level finance position. Um, and about a year into that, I was like, gosh, I think that, I don't see anything promotion wise where I'd be like, that's where I could see myself thriving. So even when I would be like, what should my goals be here? It was like, none of those make me excited.
Yeah.
Um, so it's kind of like, well, I should probably try to figure out if I can do something else then, because I don't want to just clock in and clock out if I'm not enjoying it or not feeling like I'm getting a lot personally from it. So I always kind of thought I was funny, and I always thought, writing for TV shows would probably be the coolest job in the world. My favorite show growing up was The American Office, and I just always thought the people that are writing this stuff, that must be the most fun job, because
Hmm.
I love it so much, and I bet that the people that get to just come up with the ideas, that's probably the coolest job in the world. So I I kind of told that to my dad, and he was like, "Well, why don't you talk to Jeff about it?" And I was like, "Jeff Foxworthy," because he and my dad have been friends for a long time. And he was like, "Yeah, why don't you just go talk to Jeff Foxworthy about it?" And I was just like, because that's crazy. But he was like, "No, Jeff would love to talk to you about comedy stuff." And so we went to dinner or lunch, and he kind of told me um about how there are people out there that write um for TV, and not just TV shows, but also like reality shows. Because he would say, like, when he
Hmm.
was on, like, um are you funnier than a fifth grader, or are you funnier than a fifth grader, are you smarter than a fifth grader?
Fifth
No one's
grader's
funnier. No
hilarious.
one's funnier than a fifth grader.
No one.
Um,
Find me one.
but he said, when you're on a show like that, there's writers, and you're saying, "Oh, we need a bunch of jokes about this. So who can come up with the best joke?" And so he said, "I know some people like that I can connect you with." So he connected me with this guy in Nashville who writes for comedic projects that people have, and that guy said, "I would love to help you, and I first thing I want you to do is write 5 minutes of jokes and go do them at a stand-up comedy open mic." And I was like, "Oh, that's not what I want to do at all." And he was
Hmm.
like, "You can either do that, or you can do like I think he said, or you can write a funny blog, or you can do a funny sketch." And for whatever reason, I was like, I guess I'll try stand up, even though I never really wanted to. And so that's how I started. I was writing 5 minutes of jokes and sending them to him, and he would kind of give me his feedback and notes. And I every time I would go on stage, I would be like, "Oh, I could have done better than that." And so I just kind of kept getting up until it was something that people were asking me to go do places. And um, a few years later, I was able to quit my budget analyst job and do this full time.
So okay, so what? And I missed it. Who was the guy you were reporting to who gave you that you got to do one of these three things? That wasn't Foxworthy,
Um,
was it?
no, that was the guy that Jeff connected me with. His name is Scott
Uh,
Dunn in
got
Nashville,
it.
and I would tell him every time something cool happens for me in comedy, I text him and be like, "Hey man, thanks for
Wow,
challenging a complete stranger to do something insane, because it changed my life."
that's
So
amazing.
very very grateful to him for sure, and Jeff.
All right, so tell what was your? Do you remember I mean, literally the first joke you did on stage at the very first time you stood on stage? Do you remember the first joke?
Oh man, yeah, I do, because I last week or week before last, I was just curious, and I went back and I found my emails with Scott, where I was like, "Hi, my name's Andrew Stanley. Jeff Foxworthy gave me your information. I want to learn about joke writing." And so I kind of was reading through our email chain where he was offering to help me, and I could see the email where right after I did my first set, I was kind of giving him the report about how it went. And it's funny because there's a few bits in there that I still do that are
Wow.
much better versions of them. But I was really
Yeah.
surprised to see that I think there were two bits in my first set that worked out. Like after kind of messing with them for a while, like those are ones that I would do at a show tomorrow. And then there are some that are just nonsense that I would never touch again. Um, so it was cool to see that, and a lot of that was because he was helping me and he knew
Yeah.
what the things to do and not do were. So I feel like he gave me a jump start because he probably stopped me from learning a bunch of mistakes the hard way.
I'm so interested in as you listen to more and more comedians. I mean, obviously you see the finished product, but and we'll talk about this a little bit later, but the construction of a joke and a bit. I was listening to Louis C.K. talk with Theo Vaughn on an
Mm.
interview, and them saying like, oh, and then Louis C.K. oh, you said this, and then I really think you could take that into another bit. It's really interesting the eye that other comedians have for something like, no, drill in there. Like I see something there. So he took you through a little bit of that process. Can you tell us the first joke? Do you know it?
Oh man, I don't remember what I opened with. I definitely talked about being homeschooled, which if you've seen me do stand
So
up, you
good.
probably heard me talk about that. And then I do a thing. I don't do it as much anymore, but still like to do it where I talk about instead of paying for my mom's nursing home one day, I would just frame her for a crime and let her go to prison and just let the taxpayer take care of it. Uh, and that actually is the first joke I told because when I
That's good.
was, I always tell people Laughing Skull doing the 5 minute open mic was the first time I did stand up, which is kind of true. But while I was preparing for that, when I was when I was emailing with Scott, trying to figure out when I was going to go up for the first time, my mom had her, I guess, 50th birthday party.
Mm-hmm.
And since it was 50, we kind of did a big outdoor kind of lunch thing with a bunch of her friends, and there was a stage and some live music, and it was not a big huge group, but it was way more produced than like a normal
Right.
birthday party, I guess. And so they asked if any of us wanted to like get up and say anything because they had like microphones and stuff. And I remember the first time I think I ever tried to tell a joke like in a stand up way was at her birthday party. I told the thing about framing her for a crime instead of sending her
Did
to a
it
nursing
kill?
home. And I remember everybody was just like, "What is he doing?" And then they realized, "Oh, he's doing like a joke, like a." And I think like half of the crowd kind of got what I was trying to do. And of course, I was stumbling through it, and I was not comfortable, which made it tougher for them to tell that I was trying to do something. But I remember I had told my brother before I was like, "I'm gonna go try this thing I was been writing." Um, and so I think a few of the people there really thought it was funny, and a few of them were like, "That was not a very nice birthday speech."
That's just so good. It's that can't be too great a feeling when someone hears your joke and say, "Oh, okay. I didn't realize you were joking." Yeah,
Oh, a
that
joke. I see. Yeah.
yeah, sure.
It helps when you're at an event where they're like, "Time for jokes,"
Where
and
they're primed.
not just the your pastor's wife's birthday party, and her son's up there like, "Is he a terrible person or trying to do something?" I don't.
Yeah, budget. Stick to the budget. Did you get any of those yelled from the crowd? Stick to the budget. Analyzing. Did
Yeah,
anybody yell that
yeah,
at
man,
you?
back to the cubicle. Uh, yeah, I stole a lot of company time writing jokes in my cubicle that year.
Does so did your parents ever give you like did your mom ever give hey Andrew do something funny did you ever get that from your parents? I'm sure you get that from other people, or maybe I'll start with that, and then the second question is like there has to be such an expectation on you that you got to be funny in all moments, and if not it's a real downer. Like what's that guy's deal?
I would say more often from like family, it's hey, can you stop trying to be funny all the time?
Is that
Rather than Andrew, please continue to be so funny. It's much more of a hey, can you just turn that off for a few minutes? We're having
please
dinner, or
can
like
we just
some
yeah can we just finish the funeral here and then you can be
yeah,
funny again, one of
yeah.
those.
Not everything has to be one of your little things. Um, but strangers, you do get that sometimes for sure,
Yeah.
especially if if they're like, so what do you do on an airplane or something? And
Yeah.
if I tell the truth, which is less and less these days, if I'm like,
Yeah,
I'm a
what's your
comedian.
go yeah, what do you revert to if like do you just go back to budget analyst or do you like talk back in the watercolor days?
I love hearing different comedians' answers because everybody kind of has their fake career that they tell people that they don't want to talk to. Um, and I forget who it was. So there's somebody that always says they're in real estate, or I mean, you really want to pick something where there's no follow up questions,
Yeah, right.
because and I've learned that I just still say budget analyst, because nobody cares. Nobody's like, oh, that's interesting. What kind of analysis? Like, nobody. Where do you do that? How do you get your
Yeah, you guys in the red or the black? How'd to go
yeah.
budget
But
wise?
sometimes if you say comedian, they'll be like, "Oh, what kind of jokes do you do?" And then just trying to tell people, trying to
Yeah.
describe yourself to someone who's never seen you is just like it's like, "Oh, I tell some stories and it's, I got it." And it never, there's never like "Oh, great." It's always
Yeah,
just like, "Oh,
sure.
I forgot seemed like that was not a great question."
So how do I've heard a lot of comedians talk about where they draw their inspiration from, and you get some you start going down a deep path or a dark path, excuse me. Um, for you, what do you and the homeschool may be one, but like what are those experiences that you think you draw on to come up with your bits, to come up with your material? Again, maybe it is largely homeschool stuff, but what was it kind of in growing up that you really find yourself drawing from, or and I'm not trying to like, put you on the psychologist chair here, but a lot of people say that it's comedy is then the reason why they're so good at it is because comedy was always used as a defense mechanism growing up, that they were able to defend off if they were getting picked on or if they were, or if had like some problems at home or something like that. I don't mean to go too deep or dark here, but I'm curious if like where do you draw from there to come up with your stuff, or how did you start getting into it and realizing you were funny?
Yeah, you're right that there's a lot of comedians that you can tell their jokes kind of come from pain. It seems like the worse childhood they have, the better comedian they are. And I always tell my parents, I always say, if y'all had just been worse parents, I would be such a better comedian. Um, so thanks a lot.
Thanks
Um,
a lot.
I think it definitely is a defense mechanism for sure. I think that's how a lot of people get naturally to be thinking about funny stuff or to come up with jokes, is because it is like an easy diffuse any tension that
Yeah.
exists. And that's what comedy, I mean, that's what jokes are in a comedy club. It's kind of building tension and releasing it. So I think in your life you can use it the same way. If there's tension, you can that you're feeling, whether other people are or not, you can release it by trying to lighten things with a joke. Um, with the material, kind of coming up with it, I wish I had a really good answer, and I think every comedian has a kind of the same answer and also different. But I mean, it's just observing. I think Seinfeld would
Yeah.
say it's like observe and report, and you can observe things about your own life, or you can observe things in the world. You can observe things in politics. You can observe things from your past, which is where I got a lot of my first stuff for sure. Was looking back, like, okay, homeschool preacher's kid, well, growing up like that, I need to mine that for material, and that's in a lot of ways. I think for me, it's easier to write jokes about stuff from the past because you have a better bird's eye view
Hmm.
of it than what's going on with you currently.
Right.
I think the best comedians are able to zoom out in the same way, but in current. Like, there's so many comedians. Like, Taylor Tomlinson is so good at I forget which. I think it was her first Netflix special where it's a lot about what it's like to be in your 20s, and it
Hmm.
really connected, especially with people that are in that stage of life.
Interesting.
But people were blown away because it's like, but you're still in your 20s. How are you analyzing it so well, and you're not even past it? And I think the best comedians are able to do that, where it doesn't take you getting distance from something for you to be able to have a cool, unique perspective on it.
Yeah.
Um, and so I think that's why it's easier for me to write jokes about growing up because it's behind me. But I would
Yeah.
love to get better at kind of more current stuff, and that's probably where I'm pushing now.
I'm curious. You touched on it, and I was actually going to reference Seinfeld and how he talks about that observation. How he has his notepad with him all the time, and then he takes those notes, and then he goes back and he has his scheduled time to go start the construction and see if there's something there, and then discard it
Yep.
if it doesn't. Talk to me about the evolution of a joke or a bit from observation all the way until the time when the exact order of the words and inflection that you need to give to get the best crowd reaction. So that whole life cycle is so fascinating to me because it feels so natural when you hear a great comedian, almost like they thought of it right then, and you realize that no, that is hours and hours and tens and maybe hundreds of hours perfectly constructing. Will you walk us through the construction of a joke, which ironically will probably make it not funny, but I'm just curious how the construction of a joke, just the mechanics of all of it.
Yeah, it's way less romantic when you just know how it works. It's funny because sometimes you it feels like the joke comes gift wrapped. You think of it and you try it on stage that night and you're like, that worked great. That
Mm,
needs very little I can add stuff to it, but that version of it kind of just worked. Doesn't need much. And sometimes you just have an idea that you think is so funny or has so much potential, and then you take it on stage night after night and it feels like you've got to, you put too much weight on the bar and you can't lift it,
oh,
but you're like,
yeah.
I know I should be
Mm,
able to lift this. Um, and so it's both of those things. And I think it's what's your tolerance for uh, trying. How many times can you try it and fail it before you're like, all right, maybe this one just isn't gonna make it, or maybe I set it aside and come back to it later when I'm a better comedian or better writer.
yeah.
Um, I would say the ones like the jokes that I am the most proud of in my act definitely started to where, by the time you've tried them 3 times on stage, you can tell this has got something
Mm,
that's worth continuing to work on. And it's working well enough now that it's still fun to do. Even as I'm working on it, it's still working. And then that's when it's really fun because
mm,
the joke works, you're confident in it, but you still get to tinker with it and
yeah.
add stuff and remove stuff and then, over time it gets really strong. Um, did you say you wanted a specific example?
I was just curious more the work that goes behind it. So I mean, if you have an example, that's great. But to your point, like you observe something, you think of something, and then it's how do you begin to dissect if there's something actually there, and then to the point where you know that okay, this is something that really really plays.
Yeah. The cool thing and the frustrating thing about stand up is that the only way to really edit your jokes is to try them in front of
Well,
people. There's not a lot of behind the scenes learning. You're doing a lot of writing and coming up with ideas behind the scenes, but you can't really test them or know how to change them until you're testing them on people. It's um it's different than music in that in the in a band I'd imagine you can practice a lot
yeah,
behind closed doors and get it perfect, or at least the version that you think is perfect, and then the audience may still tell you, hey, that's not as good as you thought, but at least you can get it to a place that holds up and that you're proud of. But in stand up, the exciting part is that you don't get to do that, so you get to go out as many nights as you can and throw stuff against the wall. And some nights there's no better feeling than when something you weren't sure if it was going to work and it works. That's the real rush. It's fun to tell jokes that work and they work. That's fun. But the new ones when they're first starting to work is the most,
yeah.
for sure, the coolest part. So the answer is, you write it as good as you can, and then you just got to take it on stage and do it as many times
Yeah.
as it needs. And that's one thing I like about living in Atlanta is that there's a great comedy scene here and several clubs and lots of shows that happen every night. And so if I have stuff I want to work on, it's easy to find, low risk places to try it that still have good audiences. And I'm not having the pressure of somebody's paying me this many dollars. So I just need to do the best I can and not mess around with anything new.
Yeah.
Um, so I definitely have that comedy scene here that helps me a
Yeah.
lot when it comes to developing stuff. And
What's
other
your
comedians hear your jokes and go, "Hey, have you thought about it this way?" And you're like,
oh,
"No,
so
I
you,
didn't think about it that way."
So you give each other notes. So it's the
Yeah.
fraternity, like you guys are giving each other notes. Who's your dream team? Your top, you can go grab dinner tonight with three comedians, living or dead. Who's your dream team? your
Oh
advisory
gosh,
council?
I don't know if I'd be good at a dinner with most of my favorites. Uh, I would rather just like watch them have dinner than be at the dinner.
If you could sit and if you could, let's imagine that they all got a beach table at watercolor in 2013. You could just stand and watch them. You as the attendant. Who would those top three
Yeah,
be?
yeah. Oh, that's a better way of framing it. If I
Yeah.
could take certain people to their seats, it's very tough not to say Norm Macdonald. Uh, I think he's so funny and just um, clearly doesn't care what people think.
Yeah.
Didn't care. It's sad to
Didn't.
talk
Yeah.
about him in the past tense. Um, and just so funny in his own very specific way that wouldn't even work for someone else, which is always the most fun to me, is to watch somebody that you're like, oh, this is funny. It's well written and in all the same work went into it, but there's another level of funny because it's this specific person that's doing
Yeah.
it in their own way that you would never teach someone else to do it that
Right.
way, but it
Right.
works for them. Um, so he's the one that, I mean, any video of him makes me laugh, whether it's a podcast or his stand up or Saturday Night Live.
Yeah.
So I'd pick him. I really like Patrice O'Neill.
Yeah.
I didn't listen to him a lot growing up, and really until after he had already passed away. But hearing other comedians talk about him, comedians that were friends with him, make me wish that I uh, I could have gone to see him. Or they always talk he was just the most ruthless
Mm.
guy to be at the table with because he would be all over people in a kind of loving way. It sounds like,
Yeah.
but just a so I mean that would be fun. I went and saw Adam Sandler
Mm.
um, a few weeks ago. I was in Savannah and had a show,
Wow.
and after my show ended, somebody was like, Adam Sandler's playing the arena down the street," and I was like, "Oh," and
Wow.
I looked at my uh, watch and my phone. I didn't want to say phone in front of you. Uh, I know you're just so against phones in every aspect. I looked at my analog
We love
watch
them.
that doesn't get
We
text
love
messages.
phones.
Um, and the show had just started. So I Googled, I Ubered right straight to the show and got there and got to watch him. And what a amazing career a guy like that has had.
That's
And
amazing.
it's so funny on stage. So I'll say Adam Sandler, Patrice O'Neill, and Norm Macdonald
And
at
for all the
watercolor.
parents listening out there, I would say those are all not safe for work, so probably not kid appropriate. Which
No, no, this is an
leads
adults only beach in this scenario. Yeah.
which leads us to my next question, which is you're a clean comic. You and I'm interested in those dynamics, and do you feel like in the way you do it, do you feel like you're in any way disadvantaged in the industry or even typecast? How are you viewed? Do you think it dilutes like your ability to really be the comic that you want to? I'm curious all the thoughts around that, which is a perfect segue from Patrice O'Neill to you being a clean comic.
Yeah, right. It's really cool to be doing comedy at a time where there's so many successful and respected comedians that are clean.
Yeah,
Um, I don't think there's really any all of the I don't like clean comedians, I don't like dirty comedians is in my experience from consumers of comedy way
yeah,
more than from comedians. I don't think that there's any comedian alive that dislikes Brian Regan,
yeah,
and he's squeaky clean. And I don't think there's any comedian alive that doesn't love the way that Anthony Jeselnik writes jokes.
yeah,
Who's the darkest comedian that maybe touring. And so there's so much respect among comedians for just good jokes and good comedy that I don't think that there is a among comedians advantage or disadvantage there.
yeah.
Career wise, there's a lot of advantages to being clean. You can get hired for a lot of stuff that, you know,
Mm,
things that people wouldn't hire a comedian that they thought was going to be dirty for. I'm sure there's some disadvantages too in the industry in terms of, um, there are shows where they're like this kind of the culture of this show is that it's kind of anything goes. So
yeah.
maybe we won't ask the homeschool kid to do it. But also, I haven't even really found that to be true. I think that people that run shows want the funniest people they can find. So whether you're
Yeah,
clean or not probably doesn't factor in as much as funniness. Um, So I think it's a personal thing. I always tell people, I'm like, you just need to be authentic. And if that's cussing, then
Yeah.
cuss. Like don't pretend to be somebody you're not. So if you're clean, be clean. If you're dirty, be dirty. If you're somewhere in the middle, be somewhere in the middle.
Yeah.
And then adjust your life if you need to, and
Mm.
then your act can follow that. But you don't need to. It's the comedians that it's funny because the clean comedians are the ones that turn out to be criminals a lot of the time. I think that's a Mike Birbiglia or John Mulaney thing they said one time. It turns out a lot of clean comedians are criminals. Um, so it's not even always a good reflection of character, honestly. So there's no
Yeah.
judgment from me or from most comedians when it comes to that stuff. Um, but yeah, it's just a decision for me. And I feel too dirty for some shows. I mean, I was doing a show last night at a Christian
Wow.
school. It was a Christian school just for the parents, but there were
Yeah.
four, second graders sitting on the front row. So I had to skip a few things.
Mm.
I always say,
Interesting.
family friendly, depending on the family. Uh, because everybody's got different stuff. I got bits
Yeah.
about vasectomies and stuff, and I'm like, I don't need these second graders asking their parents on the way home what a vasectomy. Like, it's not like a filthy joke, but it's like
Yeah, exactly.
I'm an adult, so I talk about adult
Yeah.
stuff. I'm not writing jokes for kids or anything.
Yeah.
Um, so it's always uh interesting to have to figure out where the line is. But
That's really interesting.
I
I
feel like
actually
I
think
just rambled a lot to answer your very simple
no,
question.
no, it was a perfect question or perfect answer. I was curious. In a way, I could see it. In a way, I mean, certainly the shock comedians and the ones who aren't that great at it. It's almost a crutch to be able to go towards something dirty, and it seems like it's a little bit more of an uphill climb for you to be able to do entire bits that are clean. And to me, it requires a lot more creativity. So I asked the question, but I had my own preconceived notion, which was I actually think there's a pretty decent advantage in it because if you're um, what it forces you to do to not just rely on kind of the old standbys.
Yeah, I think that the dirty comedy for new comedians can be a crutch, but the and crutch maybe isn't even the right word. It's just kind of like you can add some oomph to your set by
Yeah.
cussing, I think. And
Yeah.
I think for newer comedians, sometimes they fall into that and lean too heavy on it, probably. But I think I was listening to an interview like who you mentioned earlier, Louis C.K., and he was talking about how he hates it when people say that being a dirty comedian is a crutch because he's like, you try talking about this insane stuff to people that were not expecting it. Like it is not
Right.
like it. Yeah, you try to go tell people blankety blank blank when they didn't know it was coming. Like
Right.
so, it kind of
Exactly.
goes both ways. I think
That's a
if
good
you
point.
get to be too graphic, it kind of is like, oh my gosh, I would not have it in me to say that
Yeah.
stuff. Like so.
Yeah. No kidding. Uh, so another interesting transition. Um, you have you're from a line of great communicators. Your grandfather Charles Stanley is a well-renowned minister and just a terrific communicator. Your father Andy Stanley is an amazing communicator, one of the best communicators on the planet, in my opinion. I'm curious, what is that? And maybe it's just an open general question. What was that like coming in? I don't even want to call it a shadow, but maybe the expectations that people had on you. What was that like coming up in that with that name recognition, with that lineage, and then maybe the expectations that came along with it, good or bad?
Yeah, it's helped me get a lot more church gigs, for sure. I uh, I definitely get a little bit of extra trust, I think, than other comedians would get just automatically because of my last name, which I learned to be okay with because
Yeah.
comedy's one of the great things about it is that no one can. You always know how it went.
Yeah.
There's no. You can't have a last name that makes people laugh.
Hmm.
Or I mean, or makes people laugh for an hour.
Unless it's a real
No,
silly last
nobody's.
name. Yeah.
Yeah, Galifianakis kind
Yeah,
of
you
used
go.
that.
That makes you kind of
Yeah.
giggle.
But I mean, it is a comedy is a meritocracy. Once you're on stage, it is because
Yeah.
you can't kill if you're not funny.
Hmm.
So that helps me. If my last name gets me in a few extra doors, then I'm not gonna say no to stuff. But also, you know, it gives me it helps me to know that as long as I'm delivering great jokes, then that you know
Yeah.
then I don't need to worry about it. I would say that one of the things I was a little bit worried about when I was starting, I started doing stand up, never intending to be like, and then one day maybe I can be in churches a lot.
Right.
Because I didn't even know that was a thing. We never had comedians at our church. I
Yeah,
didn't know that
right.
volunteer appreciation nights happen every night at different churches that they're looking for entertainment. And so I was just trying to write jokes so I could go write the Office or whatever.
Yeah, right.
So I'm in comedy clubs in Atlanta where both of my granddad and my dad have been pastors of large churches, and I was my roommate when I told him I was going to do stand up was just like, "Are you going to use like a stage name or anything?" And I was like, maybe I should because might be people might feel weird about me being there. And then people didn't care at all or even notice. So
Mm, yeah,
that's what I love about doing the comedy clubs too. Is nobody like my dad and granddad are very well known in the Christian world, but in the
yeah,
mainstream world, like they're maybe known, but they're not celebrities outside
yeah,
of Christian stuff. So
yeah,
doing clubs is great because there's going to be Christians there, and there might be some people who recognize my name, but for the most part, it's just a random assortment of citizens.
yeah.
And so that's fun, and I'm glad that the name isn't big enough to cast that it didn't cast that large of a shadow for me doing stand up, especially when I was starting.
Yeah, that makes sense. And probably in many ways, it would be a heck of a lot easier to be a comedian than to go be a pastor with with the name, right?
Yeah, I mean, and Richard Pryor's son was doing stand up for a while, and I was like,
Wow.
that sounds terrible for him. I mean, can you imagine? I mean, that would
Yeah.
be like, and then it makes me admire my dad for becoming a pastor because he grew up under the shadow of a large, successful pastor, and
Right.
so to lean into it instead of backing away from it, it takes a lot of courage, and I'm sure there are advantages along the way, but there's also a lot of extra attention when you're new at something, which is not fair. So I'm glad that my dad's a famous pastor, not a famous comedian. Where your dad was is a very high level version of that thing, then when you start doing it, you're brand new and you're getting a lot of extra attention,
Yeah.
which is not fair.
Right.
It's you get a lot of advantages. So I think it made it a lot easier that my dad is a well known pastor rather than like a well known comedian because then
Yeah.
all of that attention would have been everywhere that I was doing stand up because it falls under that like I'm sure it probably was for Richard Pryor's son, or I know Dana
Right.
Carvey's son is I think does stand up, and I haven't heard either of them, but I would imagine that that's pretty tough
Yeah.
to see the whole crowd whisper, "Oh, this is so and so's son.
Yeah.
You better be good." It's like, well, he's new or whatever when he
Right.
started. I don't know. So
Did has have you had has that created any with your dad or your grandfather? And you don't have to share if you don't. Has it created any like awkward? They come to see you perform, and you just have a shock comic right up before you. Have you had any of those kind of fun, awkward, cringeworthy situations?
for sure, when I was starting out, because when you're starting, you just can do open mics pretty much. Nobody's hiring you, or no one's being like, "Can you come do this very good show with really good, respectful comedians?" Because they're going to
Right.
put really good, experienced comedians on those shows. So you just do all the shows with the other new people. And I remember one in particular. It was at the Punchline in Atlanta, and it was their Sunday night open mic competition thing. And they used to do this thing where you would go and you would do 5 minutes, and then the audience would vote on who was the best, and then whoever got the top two votes would move on to the championship round, which was the last Sunday of the month, and then you would do the same thing again with all the other people that were in the top two. And so I was always trying to bring people out to that because if you won the overall championship thing at the end of the month, then you get weekend work at the club where they'll pay you to
Mm,
host for a headliner. So that was a huge, and they would give you like I think at the time it was maybe like $500, which was
wow.
crazy to uh to be pretty new at stand up and get a check with my name on it would
Right.
be crazy. And so I would always invite people to those shows because you pack your friends in there, they're going to vote for you whether you deserve it or not.
Right.
And so I remember my parents in like their small group came to this open mic night at the Punchline, and it's always pretty rough and dirty and shock factor stuff that's not that funny. But this night I think was even more than usual, and I don't think my parents have ever had a moment where they were like, "I wish you would stop doing this." But if there was ever a moment where they might have been close, I think my mom was like, "Are you having to sit through this stuff every night?" She's like not worried about
Oh
me, but she's like,
man.
"Are you having to just like have this penetrate your mind all
Right.
the time? Because that's not gonna over time be a
Oh,
healthy thing."
right.
Um, and so there was definitely some of that. My granddad, I never invited him to come to the Laughing Skull Lounge or anything.
Shifting to the personal side, so at Aro, we're all about intentionality. That's what our focus is on, and so it's interesting to hear, people, and it's Aro is built for families very largely. You just got married. I'm curious, newly married. What are some kind of early learnings in your marriage that may be helpful for others? And I know you have a great example. Your parents just released a parenting book. I'd like to hear a little bit about what you plan on taking into that when that happens. But I'm curious, what do you early on in the marriage side? Maybe specifically as it relates to intentionality, what have you learned?
Yeah, definitely learned a lot. And Anna and I were together for really 3 years before we got engaged. And so I thought, oh, we already know it all. We've been together,
Right.
but then living together, that's a whole nother thing. Once you get
Yeah.
married and start living together, you're like, oh, yeah, we got to be really intentional with our time. I definitely have been having to unwire myself from some selfishness that I didn't know was there that just kind of can naturally live when it's just you. It doesn't
Yeah.
bump up against anything, so it's not a problem. But once you're married and you're together all the time, you're like, oh, I can feel the selfishness that I didn't know was down there.
Yeah.
And some of that is, what are we putting on TV? If when she walks in the room, if I'm watching something, do I offer to change it, or do I just wait for her to be like, hey, can we not watch this game that you don't care about? That just you like to have it on while you look at your phone. Can I um that and like y'all preach, putting our phones away and making sure it's not just immediately, oh, let's sit on the couch, put something on the TV and be looking at our phones and catching up on the day before we catch up with each other. It's almost
Yeah.
the natural tendency addiction to, hey, let's talk, but first I want to see what's been going on today
Yeah.
online or whatever. One
Right.
of the things that we have learned really helps us with that is we started doing one of these services where they like send ingredients of food to your house
Mm.
and the recipe. Like we use HelloFresh, which is the one. I'm not trying to create an
Yeah.
advertisement for you guys on the podcast. I do have a discount code. Uh, but they send you dry ice with like 2 meals for the week. So now when I'm home enough, we cook together for
Mm.
2 nights of the week at least, and follow the directions. And we do it right when Anna gets home from work, and I'm usually waking up for the day.
Right.
And we're making dinner, and it's a perfect amount of time. It's usually like 45 minutes where we're both in the kitchen. We're kind of doing something
Mm.
together. You can't be like cooking and looking at your phone or watching TV, so we're very present in that time. And that's kind of our some of our best kind of
Yeah.
conversation of the week is when we're in the kitchen kind of doing a project together that demands our full attention to be
Mm.
on each other and on the thing we're doing together. So that's
I
been
love that.
kind of one of our cheat codes for that so far.
That's really good.
We have it figured out. After 4 months, we pretty much got marriage figured out. So if you
I
have any
can
other
tell.
questions, I would love to answer them.
Absolutely. No, it's interesting, and it is funny. Like I felt the same early on in my marriage. Just it was the selfishness. I went and played poker with some friends, and it was 11 o'clock. My wife called and said, "Where are you?" And I was like, "I was playing poker. I told you I would. What's the problem?" I literally didn't even understand.
Yeah,
And
this
so
is
I,
what I
I was
do. Yeah.
yeah, I told a friend I've made $12 to $15, honey. Everything's fine. But I told the guys who had been married for a few years, and they just laughed at me. They said, "You're such an idiot." Yeah, it just exposes. There's nowhere to hide when it comes to the exposing of the selfishness, which is such a great thing, obviously. Um, it,
Yeah, it
and
definitely is healthy because you've been living with this selfishness you didn't even know you had, I think, a lot of the
yeah,
time.
exactly. No, for sure. It is good. It is very good to know for that to be exposed. I want to hear a little bit about and I know I'm taking far too much of your time than I told you I would, which is
No, you're great.
it's a great ploy. I want to hear about your podcast a little bit, which is just hilarious. The title in itself, "No Worries If Not," is so funny because it is the most just passive thing that all of us say when we're vulnerable, and then we just immediately back off. So I want to hear a little bit about that, how that came about, a little bit of about you and Aaron, and a little plug for it as well because it's so great.
No, thank you for asking. It's yeah, I since we started doing it about a year and a half ago, it's been really. I keep catching myself typing "no worries if not," and I'm like, I can't be saying this now. It's been really fun. We actually taking a little bit of a break right now while we try to figure out kind of what our next. We're trying to level it up and get some studio space or kind of bring on a producer
Hmm.
because we're both getting very busy. But we have about 70 episodes that are out there sitting. Yep. So we're trying to level up kind of our studio space or get a producer or figure out kind of what our next um, kind of adding some production value to it and doing more video stuff because we're both getting more busy. So we need
Right.
help. So we're taking a break while we kind of figure that out. But there's 70 episodes sitting out there if anybody wants to check them out. It's mostly just comedy interviews. We talked to some Major League Baseball players. Um, We've had some founders of companies. We had a Disney princess, had a gemologist, a stuntman. So we just like talking to interesting people, and it's a lot of fun. Aaron is so
Absolutely.
funny; he makes it easy. So
I mean, it is. It's just like sneaking into a conversation between the two of you. One of my favorite things is the fake ads you guys do. You'll do an ad read
yeah,
that the other one's not heard about, and just tracking the other one up. It's super funny, super fun. I would encourage people to listen to that. It's very, very funny.
yeah. We
Um,
started out. We at the beginning, our idea was like every episode, one of us will write a fake advertisement that the other person has to read for the first
oh, that's
time
what.
live on the air. And so it's tough to get through sometimes because we make each other say some pretty horrible stuff, or not horrible stuff, but just crazy stuff.
Yeah.
And that's been really fun. But we said we're going to do that until we get real advertisers, and we're still doing it. So
Oh man, all right, one more question. I meant to prep you with this, so many apologies if I'm catching you off guard. But again, I mentioned a second ago, we're about intentionality. You do, whether it's from marriage or to writing or to just the discipline that it requires for you to be a comic and on the road. I'm curious, when you think of the word intentionality, I'm curious, what does that word intentionality mean to you, and maybe how do you see that playing out for yourself, of maybe a life of intentionality? Open-ended question.
no, great question. That's something that I'm not naturally good at. Anna is so much better at being
Hmm.
intentional and focusing on what she's working on, and I'm so distracted and running around. I think it is kind of going back to what I said earlier. It's kind of removing selfishness from interactions, and whether it's what you want to be doing or not, giving your attention to what you're doing or what your task is or what you need to do, rather than being half there, half not there, or doing something but having a bad attitude because you'd rather be doing something else. For me, it's about trying to put myself right where I am and do
Hmm.
right what I'm needing to do.
I love it. That's
Is that
good,
the right
man.
answer?
You do have marriage figured out. Now that was it
Is that
verbatim. You
okay? All
nailed it.
right, good. Good, good, good. I don't
Man,
know.
okay, so tell me upcoming shows you have coming up, plug socials, website. How can people go find you? I'm sure we'll want to go hear your stuff. It is
Yeah.
very, very hilarious.
Yep, I'm gonna be all over the country this year, which is exciting. You can see all my upcoming shows at andrewstanleycomedy.com. I'm gonna start putting some comedy club dates up for hopefully all over the country for the spring and the fall. I've got Dallas, Fort Worth area, February 24th at Hyenas. Those tickets are up now. Um, and I do a lot of private events. You can subscribe to my email list on the website, and then I'll let you know when I'm coming to whatever city you live in. I'll just email you only when I'm coming there. I promise. I've never even actually sent an email. I'm gonna start sending emails. And then my Instagram is the other way at Andrew W Stanley, because Andrew Stanley is a British photographer, so I had
There's
to add
this,
the extra W.
isn't there an Irish comedian, Andrew Stanley, also?
There is. If anybody knows how to get on Wikipedia above someone else with your same name, I could really pay you some money to help me with that. Because there is an Irish comedian named Andrew Stanley, and like all my website and stuff comes up, I think first, but his Wikipedia thing's in that top right corner, so everybody will be like, "You're Irish?" And I'm like, "No,
Yeah.
it's." I don't know how to edit the Wikipedia thing.
We're gonna figure that
Um,
out.
so there's a bunch of Andrew Stanleys out there, but I'm the only one that you need to know about.
That's right. Andrew W. Stanley at Andrew W. Stanley. Andrew, thank you, my friend. This was great. You were, as always, hilarious, super interesting, super fun. So thank you for joining us, man.
Thanks for having me. It was a lot of fun, and excited about what y'all are doing.